All right. So the next question is a very long one, but it is pretty relevant. I just had a call earlier today that they had been paying contractors. They think they might be employees. So they met with me, and it was the way that they were treating these contractors, they were really employees. But let's get to this question. I know the correct classification is ultimately management's responsibility, but I strongly believe that we have an important role in advising or guiding our clients, or at least alerting them to reviewing their compliance, especially if they seem to be unaware because they're just busy running their business. My question is coming from that concerned and helpful place. I have a client that has been growing dramatically. When I took him on last year, his gross annual revenue was 1 million. And they're on track for hitting 4.5 million this year. A really cool success story, but here's something that's making me think. The client does not have employees. Everybody who works for him is a contractor. I think for the most part that it's still valid. I am one example. I get paid pretty well by him, and I am most definitely an independent, have my own business, have other clients who I do my work for behind the scenes with no direction from him. However, other people that provide services are much closer to the business. For example, designers who create the custom product that he sells, they are all independent, and many of them have their own websites under their individual names. So it sounds like they're independent. At the same time, their involvement with the company is increasing. For example, some are now paid up around $6,000 to $8,000 per month, where it used to be 1,000 to 2,000. I am 99% sure that they do not have any staff and are doing all this work themselves. The client holds regular team meetings with them via Zoom where they discuss strategies, share success stories in the business, etc. Some of these designers also list my client's company as their employment on LinkedIn, although it often says freelance. It is starting to feel iffy to me as far as contractor versus employee goes. At what point should the client start looking at this seriously, and how would he know that the time has arrived? How would he realistically know if they are still working with other companies as independents or not? Could it be just something that is acceptable in this line of work? It seems like the designers are in control of how many designs or projects they work on every month. It just so happens that some of them pick up a whole bunch. How could my client know that it is their sole source of income? See why I'm confused here? I am just looking for some guidance. I may give my client I may give my client about watching his whole designer dynamic. I should add that he also has a sales guy that comes to the office and works with him. We had this discussion briefly, and the client said, "Oh, he does technically have his own company, but he doesn't do anything with it." Oh, and I can't control him. He can't spend all his time working with me. I'll just tell him not to come in every day. Will that be good enough for the contractor classification? No. So, how would you advise him on how to move forward compliantly and what to watch out for? He hasn't asked, but I want to make him aware. So, my first question is this something that is inside of your scope of work to advise them on at all? Because it was it wasn't very often that when I was doing bookkeeping that I would really get into the weeds with advising most of my clients on if they had contractors or employees. because I was not privy to the contracts that they had with their clients or with their vendors. And I really only once a year took a look at the W-9s. And even if somebody had a legitimate looking business name, they and they used their social security number, it was not it was very rare that somebody used a social security number on their W-9 when I was doing 1099s for my clients. And so I wasn't really involved with that aspect of their business, but now I have entire engagements that are written around employee versus independent contractor questions. And so to me, determining an employee versus an independent contractor is a completely separate engagement from most bookkeeping engagements. Now, when this person made the post, they did not say that if this business owner would have payroll, if that would be part of their scope of work or if that would be a separate engagement. Because once you're involved with the payroll and you see that there are people that are getting paid outside of payroll that looks like they should be getting paid inside of payroll, that's when I would question it. But even then, now, like I all we do is process payroll, fix payroll, train on payroll. But because I don't see the books, I I don't do 1099s for most people, I would again still have no way of knowing. And if my current payroll client had a question about employee versus independent contractor, that would be a separate engagement. So this is kind of a tough question to answer because the first thing that we need to figure out is this really inside the scope of the work that you're doing for the client? And but if it is, then I would advise to get the employment agreements or their contractor agreements. And if the contractor is sending an invoice and that is how the amount that they're getting paid every month is being determined, then that kind of seems like it would be an independent contractor. However, if the business owner is saying, okay, well, we'll track your hours, we'll track your time, we'll determine what we're going to pay you, that seems to be more of an employee arrangement. And it is really hard to know if the people are doing work for other clients without outright asking them. And some people aren't going to want to answer that question. And because it, they might not realize where that question is coming from. So if you're going to get involved in trying to determine if a contractor is indeed a contractor and has a business, but might be operating it as a sole proprietor using their social security number, I would explain why I am asking the question and then ask the question so that we can hopefully get an answer without pushback. And I normally won't ask questions if the W-9 has a tax ID and a business name on it, because that is all the proof I need that this is their business. But even then, sometimes that might, if they only have the one client and the client is determining the amount that they're getting paid, it that can be a huge gray area. And I have seen if so say they get rid of one of the contractors. So this is always the thing that you kind of want to think about and ask the business owner is if you sever this relationship with this vendor and they go to file an unemployment claim with the state, what proof can you provide that they were not an employee? A contract, a W 9 with an EIN and their business name, them providing invoices and your bill payments providing the payment to that invoice. Most of the time, that is going to be a good start. It is not necessarily always going to win your case, but it will prove that you acted in good faith having a vendor and not an employee. And it I will help advise people, but once they're like getting into a unemployment or Department of Labor audit on their employee versus independent contractor, I'm I can help them, but I can't represent them. That is 100% of the time always out of scope. I have had people that have come to me while they were in an audit and the help that I could provide to them was finding somebody in the state that they're in to represent them with that Department of Labor audit because sometimes that that is going to be the best help you can give them is to provide some other contacts for them because the last thing I want to do is not know what I'm doing and still try to help the client with this anyway because it's not going to do anybody any good. It usually ends very badly when you're like, "Oh, it's just a small whatever. I'm going to help them anyway." Um, I would advise against that and but definitely try to help them find somebody that does have the expertise and experience that you might be lacking because I always freely admit to anybody who calls looking for any Department of Labor representation that that is not what I know how to do. I can help them once that audit is done if the resolution is that they did have employees and not independent contractors. Um, but I can't be actively involved in the audit because I don't know how to help them with that. So, and sometimes um, the best thing to do if you're trying to advise or help your client with this is to call the Department of Labor for that state where these employees are located. Don't give them any information. Sometimes you have to provide some information. But if I would not give them any information on your client because that is sometimes all they need to open an investigation. And you just want to ask questions like, hey, if this is the scenario, what, how should I advise my client? And they can usually help you. It's, I will admit though, that it's been a few years, probably 6 or 7 since I have called a Department of Labor to ask these questions. So they may or may not be able to say, hey, if I hypothetically have a client or know of a person who is doing this and they're located in the state, I would need not even say the town or give any details really about the business, but say, hey, they're just located in your state. This is kind of what they're doing. Um, what what's the likelihood that they have employees or contractors? A lot of times, the Department of Labor's knee-jerk reaction is to say, "Oh, you've got employees." They're always. I found that a lot of times they're going to say, "Oh, they're employees," but sometimes that that isn't always the case. So even calling and asking the Department of Labor might be hit or miss. Um, but first, you want to determine if that is an area that you feel confident in advising your client on, and if it's in or out of the scope of your current engagement. And then, go through that employee versus independent contractor checklist on the IRS website. And they've really taken the checklist down. So I think it's really just some bulleted points and some questions now. But even, the IRS website is not the best place to always look because that's, in my experience, the IRS is like the last governmental agency that's going to get involved in the employee versus independent contractor. But when I do my trainings, I use the IRS guidelines because every state has their own, but a lot of the states are based on the IRS guidelines. So I've got some trainings. We'll post the link to the YouTube videos of the that I've done on employee versus independent contractor training so that you can have them for reference.